So Friday, my wife Karina asked me if I wanted to take the kids to the zoo, because it was kind of like the procrastinating, like last minute, we need to do this thing. We were supposed to do this all summer, and we never did. And our daughter Joyce, I can't do the math, but she'll be 2 in October, so whatever that makes her. She's never actually been to a zoo. I was like, oh, geez, that's kind of a parent fail. But I can use an excuse, right? She's like a COVID baby, so zoos weren't open for a while. But anyways, so we're like, yeah, let's go to the zoo. So she had to do a thing for work Friday in Princeton. She had to go to the playgrounds and like do measurements and stuff at the Princeton School District. And we went from school to school, and we didn't get the cops called on us, so that was good. But anyways, it was going fairly well. Joyce was sleeping. The boys were watching a movie in the car, and then Joyce woke up and is just screaming and crying and not being cooperative, And then I look at the radar, and I'm like plugging in. We were going to go to Niabi. We looked at the Quad Cities, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's going to be raining when we get there. And it's just like, it's just kind of like, you ever get to that place, and you're just like, well, let's just give up. Let's just turn the car around, go home, kibosh. You know what I mean? Like, you ever get to, you find a couple little stumbling blocks, and it's just like, let's just not do it. Let's just go home. And I kind of feel like that in life sometimes, personally. It's like, things aren't going according to my plan, maybe spiritually, maybe in my walk with Jesus, and I'm just like, you know what? I'm facing some pushback here. Things aren't going the way I thought they should, and I'm just like, you know what? How about I just give up? How about I just go take my ball home, go home, and just be by myself? And there's this thing we're going to kind of go through today in this new sermon series called Hall of Faith, and we can take setbacks that don't fit in our mind and how they should go, and you can say, just, I'm done. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to go back and have a cynical, negative attitude. Like, well, you know what? We could get there and it could be raining and it could be closed, right? And it's just like, so let's just not go. There could be construction. There could be traffic. There could be a reroute. And it's like, all right, let's just stop. Let's just go back home. And really, what faith is in our walks, if we're talking spiritually now, what faith is having the belief, having the assurance that when I get there, it'll be worth it, right? That even though I have setbacks, even though there's things that are creeping up, if I push through, if I have perseverance to continue the walk, to continue to walk with Jesus and to go, faith is having the assurance to know God will come through on His promises. And it's really something that's evident here. We're going to be going through Hebrews chapter 11, at least a part of it today, and kind of talking about this idea of what faith really is and having assurance in God's promises. Because a lot of times we get this concept in our mind that faith is just taking this leap in the dark, right? It's taking a step in the dark and not really knowing where it's going to lead. And in Hebrews chapter 11, it's known, if you grew up around the Bible, Hebrews chapter 11 is known as the Hall of Faith. And so, the world has the Hall of Fame and all sorts of aspects, rock and roll, every sport you can think of, there's Hall of Fame. So this is the Hall of Faith. It's a collection of people from the Old Testament that are kind of highlighted here by the author of Hebrews as having noteworthy amounts of faith, who lived by faith. And verse 1 starts off defining what faith is for us in Hebrews chapter 11. It says, now faith is being sure. Can you say sure? Everybody say sure. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain. Say certain for me. Of what we do not see. If you find somebody that is a sure and certain person in this world today, they will stand out. Right? That is just a standout, just one in a million type thing in our world today. Something that is sure and certain. And what other people may think, and maybe even sometimes I would call lukewarm Christians think, is that faith is this idea of just a step in the dark and hoping it all works out. Right? Chances are, I don't know if this is real or not, but this is just a leap in the dark. I'm hoping this is all true and it'll work out in the end. And their definition of faith is like those believers, those religious people, They're just taking that leap in the dark. They're just hoping for the best. And when we look at the text, we will find that walking by faith isn't a leap in the dark. Not at all. Quite the contrary. It's a step into the promise. It's a step into the promise of God. So what's the promise? What has God promised you, and are you willing to step into it? Because God's not asking a single person here to take a step into the dark. He's asking you to walk with him step by step towards his promise. And if you back up just a little bit, in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 35, it says, "So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded." The fact that things don't go according to plan doesn't mean we just throw away everything, right? It doesn't mean we just throw away our confidence. We don't take it as a sign, as maybe we should just turn around. You ever live life that way? Like, well, it's not just all falling into place, so it just must mean I must not go that route, right? You ever have that thought process? It's like, well, let's just turn around, let's go the other direction. Obviously that's not the way, right? I'm going to keep the faith, right? If I keep going by faith with confidence, God is going to show up. God is going to be there. He's going to do exactly what he says he's going to do. Do not throw away your confidence, he says. Remember what he's promised. Remember what he's spoken over you. Remember what he's called you to. Take him at his word, because God is good. He is good, and his character is good, and you can trust him. So it goes on to say in verse 36, you need to persevere. That's a word for today. Persevere. So that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. And if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. The way we please God, it's not by our works. It's not by how goody two-shoes we can be. It's not by how well we follow the rules. It's not by how often we go to church and how perfect our church attendance is. The way we please God is with our faith. And if we don't have faith, he's not pleased with us. So this is taking promises to a whole new level. It's this far bigger scale for our lives that we become part of this like epic story. And God's saying, don't give up. Don't give up to what I called you to. Don't give up on what I promised you. So God started it all. He created it all. He saved it all. He sustains it all. And he will not delay, so put your confidence in him, is what the author's saying. Keep faith in him. So here we get to the Hall of Faith in chapter 11. We get the stories of basically people like you and me who live by faith. They give us an example of how we can also live by faith. And we put them in the Hall of Faith, and that sounds like, oh my gosh, like put them on a pillar, like they're amazing, incredible people, but they're just like you and I, right? There's some people in the Hall of Faith who have some big life problems, right? If you actually read through, maybe you think like initially like, wow, these are amazing people. But then you get a little bit older, maybe you get a little more knowledge on like these people's entire stories, and you read it for yourselves, like, it's kind of messed up, right? There's a prostitute in the Hall of Faith, right? Samson really messed up his life bad, and he's in the Hall of Faith. David, he has no squeaky clean record, and he is in the Hall of Faith. So what we need to know is this isn't the Hall of Perfection, right? To be in the Hall of Faith, you don't have to be perfect, because you can't be. But these people lived by faith. God isn't looking for people who are perfect. He's looking for people who have faith, who believe he's going to do what he says he's going to do. He gives us these examples, and kind of run through them just very briefly. He gives us Abel. Abel had an offering to God that pleased God, right? And Cain brought an offering that did not please God, because Cain gave an offering without faith, without any belief, out of obligation, right? But by faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did, and God rewarded him for that. And it's just, there's just so much there. There's so much about our offering and the things we do. Is it done out of a pure heart, or is it done out of obligation? Right? There's that in that story. There's also this idea of here's Abel who gave an offering and did the right thing and pleased God, And he wasn't really richly rewarded here on earth, was he? Right? He was murdered. Like this is kind of like very early in the story of humanity, we see this thing crop up where good things don't always happen to good people in our minds. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot going on there. And then we get Enoch, like crazy. Like they have like 3 or 4 verses on Enoch in Genesis. And he's in the Hall of Faith. And we go to Noah. But at verse 8, we're going to talk about Abraham today. So at verse 8, it says, by faith, Abraham. Now today, I'm trying to spike us up, like excite us a little bit more, like get us a little more like hoorah, like I'm not trying to be, this is kind of dull and stale lately. So every time I say by faith, because it's a big part of this chapter, if I say by faith, can you just say like amen, woohoo, let's go, bump your neighbor, do something. Like, every time we read by faith, can we do that? Can we do that? All right. We'll see. By faith. Amen. Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went. Amazing, right? Like, amen, sermon's over. He was called by God, he obeyed and went. Let's go home, pack it up. Well, you're probably thinking he must have had some kind of inside information, right? He must have been like super close with God, and God just laid it out like, here's what you need to do, Abraham. Here's everything you need to do. Just go do that. And that's why Abraham listened, right? He had some kind of super close connection and inside information that we don't get right here. Isn't that kind of what you think almost? Well, yeah, that's why he obeyed and went, isn't it? Well, it says, when called to go to a place he would later receive as inheritance, he obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. He didn't know where he was going. I don't know about you. Anybody else here not know where they are going? Like, anybody else here have like a 5-year plan that's just completely mapped out? They know exactly where they're going in life? Who else here does not know where they are going? Loud and proud, right? Like, all right. You're saying, I can't have big faith. I don't know where I'm going. Perfect. You're not disqualified. Like, actually, God can use you. Even though he did not know where he was going. We are all candidates now for the Hall of Faith. All right? We meet that requirement. As long as you have a promise, as long as you obey God, go with God, walk with his calling. So it goes on. By faith, amen, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. You ever feel like you're just a stranger in a foreign country here? You know what I mean? Or do you feel like super comfortable at home and you're unpacking and you're setting up your foundations? Like you're going to stay a while here. Like, He was like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward, it says, to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And I kind of think about that. As God, he's looking forward to a city where the architect and the builder is God. Now, I think about that, and I don't really like cities. I don't like large crowds and people, but I can't deny, they're pretty, amazing. All of the structures and the architecture of it all. My wife's way more qualified to talk about all that some of the cities in the world truly are amazing. I mean, especially if you're flying into a city and you get a good view of it, it's just, or you're driving up to, or if you get a good view of a skyline, it's just like, this is pretty neat. And I don't know if you saw, there was a concept released by, it was the Saudi Arabians. I know they're not super, what's the word? They got some issues. We'll put it that way. But they did you see that? They have a concept for a city, and it was super thin and super tall, and it's supposed to fit 6 million people and stretch for miles wide in the middle of the desert. and like have little like communities within it, and it's supposed to be able to like hold like 6 million people in it, and like I watched like the concept video. I was like, this is just incredible, like just the design and the makeup. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, like it almost seems like a prison kind of like they could have so much surveillance. There's a lot of issues with it, but still, truly thinking about it, like the design of it is really like wow. And just in the middle of the desert, built on the sand, which is a whole nother sermon. But still, the point stands, like people can think up and come up and create. I mean, you think of some of the cities in the desert like Dubai, just like popped up out of nowhere. It's pretty amazing the cities that people can design and build. But we have a God who can dream it up and build it up. And if a man or a woman can build cities that are truly awe-inspiring to us, what kind of city can God make? And Abraham was looking forward to that city. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11, we'll continue on. By faith. Amen. Yeah. Janet's on it. The rest of you are a little slow. By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and countless as the sand on the seashore. We see God created, right? God created. I love how this starts in verse 3, actually. It says, by faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Right? You see it right there. Like God created everything out of nothing. You know what I'm saying? You see what it's saying there? We understand that the universe was formed at God's command so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. God made something out of nothing. God created the universe out of nothing. And it's a big question in life, right? Do we have the faith to believe that He exists? It's the only thing that pleases Him, is our faith in the belief that He exists. It's a big question in life. Does God exist? Right? Well, what do you think? I don't know. Right? Isn't that kind of the conversation? I don't really think there is a God. And I'm just thinking, wow, I respect that faith. I respect that. Right? That the most complicated system of existence, like life itself, the fact that our world has like this cyclical day and night cycle, and there is rain, and there is snow, and there is water, and there's a system to it, and there's plants and animals, and there's microorganisms up to giant, massive whales, and it's just like that takes a lot of faith to just think this all just happened, right? And I'm in awe of if you've seen the stuff with the James Webb Telescope. It's like Hubble on steroids. Have you heard of it? It's like way farther out in space than Hubble is, and can see rays of light that the Hubble never could see. And even the first images are just like, wow, that is crazy. Like these are just galaxy after galaxy after galaxy after galaxy, and it's just like a pin drop of the universe. And I saw once there's an astrophysicist that came up with a theory. He's trying to hypothesize and argue that something came from nothing, that the universe came from nothing. Because there's a big issue with the Big Bang theory. What made the Big Bang bang, right? Something had to cause the energy to make this. If there was nothing, how did there come something out of it? So his whole theory, maybe I'm confusing the heck out of you, is that it's possible, even though it's never been observed in existence, that something, matter, could come from nothing. And well, the universe just kind of created itself. What faith, right? It's like, that's a great philosophy to build your whole life on. And I think, as I kind of ponder over things, and I actually kind of thought about it in the way that, I know he's also not super popular for a lot of reasons, but Elon Musk, and the idea of like how like pretty cool technology the Tesla is, and the vehicle that it is. There's so much technology behind it. It's a really cool, neat thing. And there's actually I can't remember the name of the model, but it's like super like hyper souped up electric car, and it has like a steering wheel that looks like it came out of Star Wars. Have you seen that? You look it up. Anyways, it can beat like any other stock vehicle you can think of in the world in a drag race. Like, it's amazing. It just takes off. Like, it's not even close. And it's like, that's really cool. And then you think about it the way Elon Musk kind of talked about it is like the product, the car actually isn't that much technology. It's not that difficult to make. He said the factory to build it is actually 100 times more complicated than the car. And I think about how complicated this world is, this universe is, and then I think, and I mean, in that kind of line of thinking, how much more sophisticated and complex is the one who created it? Like, it just leads me to a place of just like, wow. And what's he like? What is that designer like? And how amazing is it that what he really desires is for me to have faith that he exists, and that I would walk by faith, step by step with him. I'm not losing steam, you know, like I feel like I'm like still excited. You guys, I don't know. In Hebrews 1:1, how this whole kind of story starts, it says, in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, who he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, right, his death, burial, and resurrection, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty, capital M, in heaven. God created, man obliterated, saved humanity through Noah, and then God calls Abraham to take a step of faith. Right? He's saying, I'm going to bring a people together, a people of God with you, Abraham. Right? I know you're old. I know you have your doubts. And I love how the writer of Hebrews basically says that he was good as dead. But he says, I promise you, your descendants will be more than the grains of the sand on the seashore. Through this family, I will bring my son into the world, Abraham. Right? Who will be a light into a dark world. He will save humanity from death and separation from me. He will send the Holy Spirit, and his church will be established on earth to gather up all of his people, and he will come back to this very earth soon. And so Abraham went, it says. Now I gave you a little illustration on the back of the bulletin for kind of the roadmap that Abraham took. So Abraham lived in the Ur of Chaldeans. You know, great people, those Chaldeans, I tell you. And God says, I need you to leave it all. Leave it all behind. Everything you built up, everything you've owned, you've acquired, accumulated. He says, take this step and leave. And so Abraham goes to Haran for a season, which is, I think, is modern day Turkey. And it's kind of a long delay there. It wasn't very immediate. Abraham's going to the promised land. And so his father dies in Haran. He crosses the Jordan to Shechem, then Bethel and Jerusalem to the promised land, where there's Mount Moriah, and he climbs a mountain to offer his one and only son. And oh, but God provides, doesn't he? He came through. He provided a ram in the thicket, and all this happened. And what the map doesn't completely show is then there's a famine, and then Abraham moves to Egypt, and then that's how we eventually get to Moses and all of that. And God says to Abraham, who believes in the promise of God, and maybe you're thinking, that, well, that's great for Abraham, right? That he has this roadmap that he was able to follow. But all he knew was leave Ur. That was it. I know there's a roadmap there, but all he knew, I don't know what the encounter was, why it was powerful enough. We don't know the specifics, but Abraham had the faith to take the step and leave. And God unfolded the promise. God's promise unfolded after step by step. The layers peeled off and the promise was revealed. Maybe you're thinking, that's great for Abraham. Like, I could have Googled this map on my own and seen this. But Brian, could you give me my map? What's my roadmap? Where am I going? What am I supposed to do? Which direction am I supposed to take? Where am I supposed to live? What job am I supposed to take? How am I supposed to serve? What is God asking of me? That would be awesome. But God isn't interested in giving you a map. He's interested in you taking a step. If he gave us a map, he would never see us again. Would he? If God said, this is where you're supposed to go for the next 10 miles, he wouldn't hear from us for 10 miles. Instead, what God calls us to is take a step. And then, like, God, I need to take another step. I need you here with me. We'll take a step. I still don't know where I'm going, God. I still need you. Take a step. Walk in relationship with him. God didn't create you for a map, but for a relationship with him. Okay, you're calling me to take this next step. I'm going to take one step. Oh boy, I don't know what's next. God, I need you to see me through this. Here's the next step. And we see Abraham as such a hero of the faith in this hall of faith. But truly, you and I are so far ahead of him. We have no reason not to walk by faith. Notice what it says about Abraham in verse 13. It says, all these people were still living by faith. I'm still not losing steam, guys. When they died. All these people were living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were looking for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. What a word that is. For he has prepared a city for them. If you skip ahead to the end of the chapter, it says, these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. They kept on going by faith. The promise was far off, and they didn't even receive it in their lifetime, but they kept on going. You think even Samson, who is mentioned here in the Hall of Faith, at the end of his life, he had screwed up so bad, they were mocking him. He was torn down, ripped apart, messed everything up, and at the end of his life, he said, dear God, just one more time would you use me to bring glory to you. The last thing he did is he remembered God had a calling and a promise on his life. What promise has God spoken over you? Are you willing to fight the fight of faith? And I think a lot of times we get the faith equation kind of backwards. Right? We have believed that faith actually activates God doing for us what we need. You know what I'm saying? We think if we have enough faith, that activates, that like puts God into motion to do the things that we need. And none of these people ever got what they were believing for. They all died still living by faith. Still looking for that city. Still believing for that promise. That the one would come and that he would come soon. These people were hoping for and believing for what we have already seen. They didn't know yet of the one that would be born in Bethlehem. They didn't know of the one who would be called Jesus Christ. They didn't know about the cross. They didn't know about that Easter morning. They didn't know about the glory that was to come. And we know. We are so far ahead of Abraham. The promise has already been delivered. I think of this idea of walking by faith, and I kind of harken back, and I know there's a saying, something like to the tune of, there's a reason why the rear view mirror is so much smaller than the windshield, right? I know there's a saying like, it's more important what's ahead and then what's behind, but I think it's important to look behind in the rear view mirror once in a while and think, man, God's been faithful. God's lived up to his promise. God's delivered in the past. And I think of, maybe like 8 years ago, I remember I was part of the church board at Walnut Community Bible Church, and we had a church leadership retreat, and we talked about so much vision and direction for the church, and a lot of like study and prayer and just fellowship, really, just hanging out with just regular guys who were men of faith. And I remember walking away from that, and on the ride home with my father-in-law, saying to him, this church is awesome. Like, I love this church, but I kind of, like, my heart kind of breaks for home, for Putnam County. I'm thinking, like, there's so much, like, just a heart for God with this church in Walnut, and it's like a similar sized town as Granville, and I just don't feel like people in Granville are getting reached the way that this church is reaching people up there. And he said, that sounds like a great opportunity for a church plant. I was like, oh. And initially my thought was, well, maybe when I retire someday, right? Maybe one day when I have more time, more money, and more able, but not right now. And I let that burning desire go on and tried to push it off and off. And then we really got down to kind of nitty gritty and talking. I kind of talked to Karina about this calling I was feeling like God laid on my heart. I just remember thinking, like, I just can't do it. Like, I know what step, like, I know what I want the finished product to look like, but I don't know steps A through Z, right? I don't know the in between, and that's scary. And I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a grand master plan. What I wanted God to lay down, hey, Brian, here's $100,000. Here's a church building. Here's a bunch of people that want to go to your church, and have at it. And it didn't work that way. The way it worked, the way God called me and led me was, just take a step. God, my finances aren't great. I can't afford this building for very long. Just take a step. God, I'm not really a preacher. I'm not really trained to do this. I'm not necessarily qualified by human standards. Just take a step. Preach one Sunday. See what happens. Well, God, here we are. Like, this is really scary. I don't know if anybody will come. Right? I'm still trying to pay off my second-born son who was, and they won't take him back. Like, I can really only do this maybe for a couple months, God. I don't think this is good. Just take a step. Just take a step. Here's the next step. And I see how God works in our lives when we live with faith. And that God does what he says he's going to do. Right? Faith is having like anyone standing up and just shouting to a hopeless world that God comes through on his promises. He comes through. Just take a step. God, maybe what you need to say today to God is, God, I don't want a map. I don't need a map. God, I don't need to know everything. And maybe that's what you need to say to God today. That's what you need to surrender to him. I don't need all the answers, God. I don't need a roadmap. God, What's my next step? The faithfulness of God in my rearview mirror just gives me the confidence to face what's in the windshield. It gives me the confidence to keep going and to not throw away my confidence and to keep taking another step and going forward. And I'm not looking forward to a city of which was designed by man. I'm looking forward to a city that was designed and built by God, where there's no depression, where there's no hospitals in this city. They don't need one. There's no jail or prison. There's no rehab because there's no addictions. There are no tears. I'm looking forward to that city. I hope you are too.